Welcome everyone to the next edition of the Care CEO Success Stories podcast. My name is Adam James of Bring Up PR, and I'm delighted to say today we have Tom Hartley. He is MD of Carterwood, and I'll just explain about Carterwood in a little bit. Well, in fact, Tom will do a better job than I will, of course. But before we do, this is going to be a very important episode because it's what's the market looking like for care providers in 2024. And Carterwood specializes in providing advice and data insights into providers of elderly care and retirement living. So Tom and Carterwood represent 85% of the top 20 care home providers in the UK. So you better be listening to this episode and take some notes. So I'm delighted to say to have Tom here with us. Very briefly again, the Care CEO Success Stories is where some of the leading CEOs and leaders and MDs share what they consider their single biggest achievement for us all to learn and develop from. And if you've not listened to previous episodes, please make sure you do. There's some really, really great guests we've had on, and so much, I repeat, to learn from people who have genuinely been there and done that and got the t-shirt and a whole lot more. Provision of great care and provision of building and developing care providers. Also subscribe and make sure you like us, tell your colleagues, because that spreads the word. Anyway, as I say, let's get straight into the episode. Tom, welcome. Why don't you start off by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Adam. And thanks for having me on today. I've listened to a few of the pods over the last couple of months, and it's great to be invited on. So thank you. As you said, I'm managing director at Carterwood. We're all about market analysis within social care, focused on the elderly care and retirement living kind of subsectors. So working with lots of operators, developers, investors, and other advisors as well on all things market analysis, whether that's around due diligence, benchmarking, operational performance, and things like that.
Fantastic. Great. Well, let's get straight in. So 2024 is upon us almost. And what's going to be on the horizon, Tom?
Well, it's a good question. And I think we have to start by looking at two different perspectives. I think there are a group of operators who are probably quietly enjoying life and having, in terms of trading performance, some real success. And that's through lots and lots of hard work. But I think there's probably some people in the camp of having a really good run over the last 3 to 6 months, and that should continue into next year. There's probably another half who are having a really tough time, and probably margins are very squeezed, CapEx is very tight, and growth plans for the future may well be stagnant or on hold. So I think there's definitely a kind of polarization that we've seen over the last 6 months that will carry into 2024. There's sort of three main reasons for that. One is where your fees are focused and how much exposure you have to the self-pay market, how successful you have been in recruiting staff, and whereabouts you kind of operate in the market. So I think for those two groups, we might see some quite different experiences going into 2024. For the first group, and I think although everyone should be looking at this, we see quite a lot of potential change from what we've had the last couple of years. I think trading conditions will continue to be very difficult, but for those in the right part of the market, quite rewarding. We are expecting occupancy to kind of reach where this post-COVID recovery period, and that to sort of roll over into next year. We're anticipating fee rates to be consistent with where they are at the minute, perhaps not with such substantial rises as we've seen this year. We're obviously experiencing a new regulation framework that's being rolled out from the next couple of weeks. So providers will have to get to grips with that. And we're likely to have a new government at some point next year. And whilst that might not have a huge bearing directly upon social care straight away, no doubt there will be lots of work for providers to do once that change has happened, if that remains to be the case.
I see. And just one of the things that I would like to pick up on when you say the right part of the market perhaps looks a bit more positive, let's say. When you say what might be the right part of the market?
Well, I think for favourable kind of trading conditions at the minute, a good amount of exposure to private pay, where the fees now are, in some cases double in some local authorities than what the local local authority sort of baseline rate may be. And that's not 100% exposure, but certainly kind of 40-50% and upwards. With the fair cost of care exercise, the numbers that came out of that, I think, are probably slightly lower than required. I think if you're not charging fees, 900, 1,000 a week plus, it's very difficult to make the necessary margins to reinvest into the business, pay staff the right amount of money, and make a little bit at the end for, shareholders or whatever the ownership structure is.
Yeah, I see. Going ahead a little bit, because I was going to make sure that we cover it in terms of the possibilities of a government change. What would you be advising and telling care providers to be thinking about?
I suppose that ultimately, I'm not sure there will be a huge impact regardless of government in the next couple of years. There haven't yet been any sort of major social care policy announcements from either of the big parties. And
not unusual.
and we probably wouldn't expect that to be the battleground upon which the election is fought, unfortunately, but I think that is the reality as well. One area we might see some movement is the care funding reforms, and that's where we may see Labour, if that is the government, coming in and picking up those that were kicked down the road. However, that being a priority straight away, I think, is relatively unlikely. Where there does seem to be some opportunity is to explore closer links with the NHS, and whether there will be a bit more investment coming into those potential partnerships is something I would encourage providers to do now, regardless of a change in government. That's the money is in health. And the government are very open to investing in health, and it's a very well-trodden path, and there's lots of people that have tried, but that does seem to be where the investment is going to be focused. So those that are working with perhaps CHC funding, those that are working with local NHS trusts or ICBs and are able to develop a pathway to reduce some of those pressures on the health service, I think are some of those who have been successful, particularly on the back of COVID, where there were some partnerships put in place quite quickly. Not all of them were successful, but some of them really were. And I think there must be some lessons to learn from that, which we can take forward as an opportunity, rather than seeing the health service as, the favoured sibling, as it were.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And in terms of this post-COVID recovery, where do you see the longest lasting remnants of COVID in terms of for care providers?
I think the longest is probably the lessons we learned around data. Clearly, a huge amount will be learned in terms of design of buildings, adaptability, the operational handling of infection control and potential future pandemics, which we now think, may happen more often. But I think where we will learn and where we'll be able to change the most is in how we use data in this industry. And we know that, it's not something historically the care sector has embraced with open arms. We know that nearly 50% providers are still working with kind of pen and paper rather than digitized care planning and management. But I think what struck us, and I was doing a talk on this last week, was just how little data was available and how much of a scramble things like the capacity tracker were, and, just the availability of beds and the ability to follow people from hospital through social care. And I think some of those lessons will take a number of years to still be learned fully. But I think that's probably one of the longest lasting impacts that we'll see in many, many, many years to come, until we can have access to the right data to make the right decisions at the right time.
Yeah, I see. And tell me more about this access to the right data. What are you particularly thinking of here?
I suppose it comes right back down to things like digital care planning, which we are not involved directly in. But I think having things like a coordinated response to a pandemic, for instance, would have been, quite a lot more effective with better data about providers' availability, capacity, resident. And I think we would have been able to better tap into some of those systems and use those to predict some of the things that may have happened over the last 2 or 3 years. I think we're going to see a kind of data revolution in social care over the next decade. And that's where I see, a big area of growth in our sector in terms of, not sort of performance and not maybe care as such, but how we run these types of businesses and how we engage with data, how we use the benefits of data to not only offer a better experience to residents, but to make our businesses better run and better managed.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to care shows now, it's just it's like digital transformation, digital transformation, and digital transformation. It's just array of exhibitors and various digital tools. I guess like all sectors, modernizing and making things, endeavoring to use digital technologies to make everything as efficient, more efficient and quicker, and a better all-round system.
Yeah, and I think it's about, we have a big staffing problem in the industry, which is plain for all to see. I think it's about how we ensure that those hours of time are spent on the most valuable tasks, and that's frontline staff, head office staff, back office staff. Every hour that's invested should be invested in the place where that person can add the most value. And I think often where you don't have systems that are properly digitized, there is efficiency loss throughout the process, and that compounded over thousands of homes and thousands of staff is quite substantial. So I think that's going to be a huge area of focus over the next decade for social care.
Yeah, great, thank you. In terms of the private pay market, then how does that look?
So private pay, I think we've seen, this year we've seen uplifts of around 10 to 12% in the private pay market across residential nursing and dementia care. We're just in the process.
Why is that?
I think the uplifts to staff costs, other non-staff costs, and the inflation we've seen, operators have had to implement uplifts of that kind of scale. Next year, we're in the process of doing quite a big survey at the minute on where people think in the market things like fees are going to land. My best guess today is that it will be slightly less than it was this year, probably somewhere between the sort of 6 to 10% bracket, if I had to put wide range on it right now, and the local authority, also under what it was this year. But that should enable operators to keep track, at least with the cost increases that they're seeing. What will probably get squeezed is the finance costs as people come to refinance, based upon the higher interest rates we have today.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and then in terms of staff and care staff in particular, how does that? There's obviously been a number of changes and developments over the last few months, but how does that look? Because this is a headache, isn't it, for many care providers? How does that look like for next year?
We've obviously had uplifts to the real living wage announced a few weeks ago. We'll understand where the national living wage goes pretty soon. It's likely to see a decent uplift, I think, is the best bet. And staffing, a number of operators have been very successful in overseas recruitment from places like India, Nigeria, Zimbabwe. I think over the last 2 or 3 years, we've recruited 2.5 times the number of people from those countries as previous. So that's helped to really bring things like agency costs under control, and we saw peaks of agency usage sort of end of 21, beginning of 22. That's come down substantially in the last 12 months. So it's great that that's under control, but that's obviously being fueled by overseas workers, not by employing lots more people from this country. So there's still an endemic issue there around the attractiveness of the caring career, I think, to the wider general public in Great Britain.
Yeah, sure. Great. Okay, is there anything else in particular that's jumping to your mind, Tom, that you think care providers should have at the top of their mind, or be thinking about, or be aware of?
I think in the longer term, looking, a little bit further ahead in 2024, there's certainly some trends that we're watching quite closely that I think providers should be alive to. Firstly, around sustainability and ESG. Secondly, around the type of care and the acuity of care. And thirdly, around the type of assets that they're building and that they're developing. So I think in terms of the assets, with build costs, land costs where they are, it's becoming very, very difficult for lots of providers to develop new homes. So I think over time, we may see a very different approach to development. We may see the emergence of a slightly different offering to the market, which might be more 3-star than 5-star, a little bit akin to the hotel market, where not every hotel is a luxury hotel. I defy you to find a new build care home that isn't defined as luxury on the website. And I think there is a big potential area to explore of the 3-star model, much further in the future.
No, interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
which might be fitted out and designed appropriately, and and priced appropriately as well. In terms of acuity, as the other big area, I think we're likely to see acuity levels continue to go up, and the pressure from other forms of care, such as retirement living, home care, I think are going to put quite a lot of pressure on just pure residential care in the sector.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing competing models of care have an impact on that demand in some places. And finally, I think, the huge issue for all providers is that of sustainability. And that's not just care related, but, in the property sector, it's a huge issue that needs, a lot of thought to be solved and to be improved. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but it's going to be something that dominates the sector for the next decade at least, as we work towards more of a net zero environment.
Great. Tom, thank you. Fabulous. So I'd make sure, is there anything that we've not covered that you want to make sure that we cover?
I suppose the other area that we should give thought to is the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, as a general trend in the market, and the impact that could have on social care. And I think there's an awful lot of, when we say those things, we think of the robotics and we think of the care helpers in Japan and various other models that are really great in their own right. But I think we think of it very much in terms of how can that provide care. And there's some fantastic solutions out there, and there's some great kind of diagnostic models out there. We don't think so much of how we could use the data behind that to be much more powerful. So I think those that are willing to embrace and adopt that type of predictive machine learning might not necessarily be frontline care implemented, but that's where some of the biggest impact will be felt on care businesses, I think, over the next decade, and who is able to kind of harness the power of some of those systems to better their organization. I think that's where we're likely to see some movement.
I'm intrigued here, Tom. Have you seen anything, I guess in all the sectors we work in, PR and marketing, especially, on the marketing front? I mean, I wouldn't expect you to know this, but on Google, for example, Google pay-per-click, it's when people are searching for a care home increasingly, yes? And Google's always had machine learning going on, matching the words on ads with the website, or always making suggestions on new words, on new ads that it will think that will do better. And that's the machine, I guess, what may be called an elementary form of AI doing that. So in my world, that's what I'm seeing, and in some degree as well on Facebook ads as well. So it's a different kind of avenue, but it's talk about when you're trying to promote and advertise your home to make sure that people are more likely on the digital platforms to see you and see you in a positive way. I'm curious to know, Tom, in your circles that you are with and who you meet and talk to, how you're seeing AI come into play as something that's, going to be changing probably quite fast.
Yeah, so there's two areas. I suppose I've seen some interesting examples of kind of what I would call care-focused delivery, where, you've got people working on systems that can predict when someone might have a fall or something. There's quite a lot of those type models. And I think, that speaks to the kind of utilization of staff, resident safety, care quality. That's not my area of expertise, but I think there's some really good stuff happening in that market.
Yeah.
When I look at what we do, we're looking at how we can use all this stuff around fees, occupancy, staff to, say, predict the future trading performance of individual care homes, groups of care homes. So where might you need to invest in your portfolio? How are some changes in your market going to affect what happens in 2 years' time? Can you predict where exactly who in your local market may need care in the next year? And I think advancing some of those areas, and we are seeing, some of the bigger providers are already investing in this, as you'd expect. Those are some of the areas in our kind of field of data advice and analytics where I see that being really powerful.
Great. Tom, thank you so much. Just a final word from me. I usually say this at the top of the episode, but I'm founder of Spring Up PR, which hosts this podcast, and we help care providers get more inquiries faster from private pay families via digital marketing and PR. And if you head over to springup-pr.com, tomhartley.com, you'll find a whole number of webinars and videos and tips and advice on how to achieve exactly that. But enough of that. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the episode. We'll get this out and published as soon as we can.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam.